Cuthbertson has, he's been on the forerunner for this committee in the past, and he's also been contributing in the Data Centre Specialist Group Committee over the years. So another little thanks, David, for your contributions over the years, and welcome back to us. It's good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
And I will let you introduce yourself, as I'm sure you know yourself better than I do.
Good. I'm assuming we're online. Could I ask for the door to be closed, because there's a lot of chatter coming in the back. Thank you. Right. Okay, so we'll get started. Good. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming online or in person. And it's like coming back to where I was many years ago. I was just telling Richard that 20 years ago, I joined the BTS CMSG at the time. Okay, I'm still there. And I remember standing up at a presentation where we would hire a college in Oxford, sorry, not Oxford, in Cambridge, because there were so many people and we would all have accommodation because it would go on for 2 days, talking about configuration management issues and things. And I gave a presentation talking about why I do this is because actually it's good for business. If you do something that's difficult and you get skills in it, as long as you can find the right people, you can have a business for life because who else knows how to do it? And here I am 20 years later, and I'm still doing it, and I could be here a lot more. There's a lot of unknown, undocumented infrastructures around the world, but my focus has always been slightly different. I've always looked at process and method as much as how you do things. And so I haven't been around recently for a couple of years, partly with COVID, but also because I'm quite busy. And I'm busy probably, I would say, 2/3 of my time is with foreign organisations. It could be US federal agencies, it could be an airport down in New Zealand, it could be a Dutch warehousing retailer, a Finnish chemicals port, and all sorts of things. Why do they find me rather than anybody else to talk to them about this particular area? And also, why am I the only European developing an American standard? So there's lots of Americans on this, but actually this is the reason for being here at the moment, is to talk about what's been happening in an area that probably, hopefully, will impact you. Because I saw many years ago the vision of you can have a business forever and you can make good money at it, but actually it doesn't take a lot to develop a degree of expertise and be able to help people when they don't have the time themselves. So that's what we'll be covering. We've got, what, about an hour, but probably less than that with questions. So for the people in the room, informally, just ask any questions. I'll cut them as we go along. I do know my subject, so I'm not worried about anything you ask. That's good. And the title there, why do Greek gods, snakes and beer make it difficult? Because that's how IT people work. That's what they call things. When you actually start looking at it, you start realizing, isn't it ludicrous that nobody has actually thought about doing things? And I may pose a couple of questions to people here as well. Simple ones like, why don't people do service management very well? Why do CMDBs never seem to deliver the expectations? Why is documentation a big problem? It's not that difficult, is it? And these are common ones, but also, how do you solve a problem that's already there? How do you document the whole of the UK MOD? That was a question I was asked a few minutes ago outside by somebody who's not even in this room. Said because they have an issue. But every organisation has an issue, so there's nothing difficult. So how do we make lifecycle management? And I've always had a focus because of my background, originally network troubleshooting, then built data centres and networks and others. But I've always been focused around the fact that the infrastructure side is shared across many different areas. And so service management is exactly the same. It's shared across many different technologies in the business. And so for me, process management and config was important. But actually, I found the ITIL side of config management and service management is really focused around service management. There's a much bigger world out there. And actually, you still need to do it, but project people don't seem to use CMDBs, do they? No. Anybody here do IT asset management and find it difficult to get people to contribute? Yeah. What does asset management ever do for an IT project? Nothing really, because they're dealing with things quite often don't yet exist. And then you have to give information, but do they ever go to a CMDB? Well, they're not even allowed. They don't have a login to the service desk to find out what assets there are and things. So actually, organizations need to do this to manage their assets, but they're not going to get support unless there's a good reason for it. And we'll talk about why there's a change coming on. And this is for an audience that is not just UK, but America and other things. Typically, every one of the webinars that we do a monthly webinar, typically has about 60% of the audience from outside the US. Because lots of people are saying, what's the US doing in this area? Because there are no standards for this. Oh, where's? No, nothing. There's nothing. And we'll see as we go along. So why not invent one? That's what we're doing. And so hopefully this will move on. And it looks like it's not moving. So I'll revert to manual methods.
I'm going to hold 18.
Yes. So if we can, right. Okay. So that moved on. I'll just check to see if it moves on. Yeah, it's working out. Good. So what does TR60 mean? TR60 is the name of the committee that I'm part of. I run a subcommittee, and this is going to talk about things. But what does service management? How does it get involved in this? Because I originally was the chair of the original SMSG group. I set it up a couple of years ago. I think it's working now, yeah. And obviously been on the committee. But basically, there's these two areas here which actually will help you. Because basically what's going to be highlighted is you need to coordinate and understand across teams. And the operational side is covered as much as projects. But also, you need the resources. Anybody got that problem at the start there? Of getting resources allocated and having authority to do things and to get teams to conform? Well, this will help because you have to do it. Okay. The second thing there is nobody can actually do it. Although the standard is really for enterprises and the service providers that support them, in practice, trying to manage across all these teams, it's very rare you can do it. You don't have the resources. So my day job is developing software to document infrastructures. The vast majority of my customers say, I like the software, but if only I had the data, can you go and get it for me? We don't have the time. We have a day job. This is quite extra to the day job. So they need to get external expertise in many different ways. First one is just like with ITIL in the early days. People need to be educated to be able to make good decisions. But also they need professional support to help them assess their starting point. Then how do they develop processes, but also how do they gather the information and the data? So there's a lot of business coming this way for anybody who's a specialist in this area, which is why I thought you might like to know about it. Because I know the issues, but actually this is why I'm doing this, purely because there's a lot of business coming here. But actually, it's easier than asset management and some other things, and there's no one else. There is no equivalent to the BCS, SMS, or Service Management ITAM group anywhere. So why not come and actually take a little bit of a leadership position? But at the moment, there's me and a couple of other people who are doing this because there isn't anyone else. However, we have lots of interest. Where does this come? People need the ability to do self-assessments, but as we all know, it's very difficult unless you've been educated to use any self-assessment tools. What's my starting position? And so you need a standard to be able to assess yourself against. So partly what we're doing is producing tools, but we're also intending to produce auditor certifications as well as part of this, and other things. So, and the other thing is to profile this for industry areas, because this is bigger than ITIL and other frameworks. It's bigger than cybersecurity because it does all of them. The only thing we scope is it's not everything to do with IT, it's just infrastructure. So it's not software, and we'll cover that in a moment. So, yep.
Is that benefits analysis?
Where?
Needs, benefit and resource allocation?
No, basically needs, yeah, benefits, yeah.
It'd be really useful to have a template for benefits analysis,
Yeah.
because then it sells it.
You'll see later on how I had to help the rest of the committee understand each other, because nobody has ever done this before and it crosses too many boundaries. So I think you'll find it interesting as part of this. So let's go on. This is an American thing, and there's a famous hockey player who made lots of money called Wayne Gretzky, And he had this expression, quite simple: don't do the same as everybody else, go where the puck is, go where it's going to. Where's the future line? Where is everybody going? Prepare yourself and get there first. So we all know that compliance is becoming an issue and governance of IT environments. But how do you do it? You can invent another standard for cybersecurity or another framework, and you can get industry regulations coming saying you've got to do this and be assessed against it. But basically, it's just different versions of the same thing. We should all manage well, we should coordinate, we should communicate, we should be careful of risks. There is no magic to this, but doing it and persuading people to spend money doing it well, when there are commercial issues and resource issues, is difficult. So those are the issues we've got. We also have the problem of training and embedding a different culture in an organisation, because a common one is, how can you have a secure environment if nobody talks to each other and there's no documentation? Yeah, so we can't really, can we? We need to, because change is constant. So the thing here is, look to the future and prepare yourself. So this is early adopter territory at the moment, but the first part of this should be coming out later on this year. And I know it's going to come out because my team has to do it, my committee. So what I'm going to cover is a quick introduction. I think, anybody here ever heard of the TIA? Nope. Yeah, there's a few.
Just five qualified.
One or two. It's good that they're here. You'll find out later why, because we all rely on things they've done in terms of standards. But they are an American body, the Telecoms Industry Association. I'll cover a little bit about our committee structure, and you'll see how you can start fitting into some of this. Doesn't mean you need to do anything other than just be aware and take advantage of materials. If you change the way you talk, you'll get a different reaction from people. And that's the benefit to me. I talk differently to customers now, and they listen to me. I just use different words. It's just like in the old days of ITIL, when you use the word change management. I've said, I wish we had that. It says, there's a standard for that, you know. You can actually go through, and there's processes written down, and it's been done by lots of industry experts. So you don't have to think about it yourself. You can just look and see what's appropriate. I went, God, I'm glad I met you. Didn't know somebody else had the same problem. But that's the benefit of best practice standards. And this is really about best practice. It's got to be flexible. And so a few things there, just different types of thinking. And then just the end, if people want to go and look a little bit further, there's lots of materials online, and we'll be generating lots of stuff. But we've been going for about 2.5 to 3 years now. And I've been very busy as a result of it, because everybody else on the committee has said, can we have a chat afterwards about a customer I've got and other things? Because there's a lot of people there, both the end users and that. So for those not familiar with the TIA, we've been going since 1924, I think it is, or the Telecoms Industry Association, and it's not a members group like BCS and various others. It's a manufacturers association. So you have to pay to be part of it, and have a subscription. Consultants could be part of it. You still have to pay something to be part of it. But if a large organisation like US Army becomes a member of it, any person in the US Army can listen in and attend meetings. Whether you're allowed to vote on things means you have to participate a certain amount. So an organisation joins, and then individuals from that organisation go and attend as needed. So it's basically a lot of competitors getting together and agreeing to produce something because it's in a common interest. You're all familiar with the RJ45 plug? Mm-hmm. Who do you think invented it? And everybody then standardised on it. TIA. Who invented the mobile phone numbering scheme? The TIA. There's many other things. Who invented the only data centre design standard originally? The TIA, so that people could be measured for their designs. Something that's quite complex that involves all sorts of things. So it does lend a lot of weight, and also a lot of the standards people can then be audited against. But originally it was all for manufacturing components, so that then we would all build the same cable. There's a whole committee just on fibre cables and many other things. And what you see here is they have various technology programs to do with data centres, smart buildings. Anybody here heard of single pair Ethernet? No? It's going to revolutionise things. Basically, an Ethernet cable has 8 wires at the moment. It has a limited distance, goes about 1 gig if you're lucky, depending on the cable type, 100 metres. Single pair Ethernet is much thicker wires, and it's 1 single pair, not 8, and a more ruggedised connector. And it can go many hundreds of metres, and deliver a lot of power. So you can power lights off it, you can power up laptops, you can power cameras, you can put a lot of power down it and use it for anything to do with building controls, but also industrial automation, controllers, various other things. And you think, that means you don't need cabinets, that means you can have centralized control systems, you can go long distances and power the things on the ends that's remote. So any large campus environments, temperature sensors, door access control systems. Actually, that gets around a lot of the problems. If only there was a standard and everybody is building and making things to work to this. So cameras and other things will come in. It's going to be very big. Still need to document it, of course, know where it goes. And so there's a number of different things you see there. The one that's circled there is they have various committees that focus on areas to create standards. They also sell them and other things. And a lot of their standards become American national standards. So actually they get often specified by the federal agencies and customers to meet that. But they also get involved with obviously submitting the standards to the ITU for telecoms, but also ISO, international ones. And then they also do a lot of advocacy type stuff. So when, for instance, the US government said Huawei kit and other Chinese manufacturers is not allowed in any US federal agencies or any commercial organizations, we're going to ban it because we're concerned about it. They advocated to get all the funds from the US government to pay people to take out that stuff and then replace it. So it didn't actually cost people who already had the kit. And we're talking many, many hundreds of millions and things. So there's a lot of money involved in all of this. But you can see why it's manufacturers that are coming together and then they pressure the government for various things. But it's all to do originally with design and build things. What's TR60 all about? Well, basically, quite a few people all got together and I was invited in afterwards saying, isn't it a pain that when you go into an environment, the cabling looks rubbish and people try and run networks on that? There should be a law against that. There should be a standard. There isn't one. I mean, it's common sense. It's difficult to manage, it's difficult to change, there's risk involved, but it still persists and nobody can be assessed against it. There's no standard for it. There's just people's opinions saying, you shouldn't do it like that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole range of other things about the difference between what you design, what you build, and then the fact that the guys who have to operate with something that wasn't built properly. It could have been designed well, but the design could have been bad. So actually, that's a result of a number of different things. And so what would be the difference if you adopted a life cycle management approach? Well, the first thing there is, how do we keep things secure? Because you can build it to be designed, but then you can undermine it by actually bypassing a lot of those things and the original design and moving things on. And then from an operations perspective, the operations people still don't get any documentation handed over them to anyway. So they get security incidents and they don't know where anything is and they can't get contractors out and send them to a particular place. Why? Because the project team never filled in the forms and there's nothing in the CMDB because what's gone wrong is not actually one of our things. It's actually provided by an outsourced contract and we don't put outsourced devices in our CMDB because they should put them in theirs and we should have access to it, shouldn't we? But that's one of the issues around control. So how can we actually reduce costs? Because at the moment, how many site surveys happen just to find out what you've already built? Because there is no continuity of knowledge and everybody counts it as normal. It takes ages to get things done. Why? Because that's the norm. Change it. What could you do that would say, you don't need to go to site, you can manage centrally a whole large infrastructure. I have a very large US credit card company that's been using the software that I've got, but their key thing was they want to manage all planning and all changes in one place in America for the world. But the problem was they need local knowledge of every building and every wire and every cable. So they bought some software and they do that and they get local contractors, but none of the local contractors have any knowledge of that environment. They are given instructions that are all clear, that are consistent, and they have to follow them. And that's how you manage a worldwide infrastructure for about 18 years now. Into things. It's something like 15,000 equipment cabinets. Okay, you think, that's a big spreadsheet. Yeah, think what's in it. Think how many wires there are. And the answer is, they realized they couldn't secure their environment because security isn't about building a perimeter, it's about being able to react to issues. Obviously avoid some, but what happens when you have an insider problem? Or you're not even sure if it is a security incident, or you get hacked, because somebody didn't follow procedure. So how can we reduce costs, make things go faster? More importantly, how do we resource our needs when everybody's going to change? The business is going to change, the people are going to change, the outsourced suppliers are going to change, the technology is going to change, but we still have to meet our internal governance needs. And we can't control a lot of that. We have to react to it. And of course, you often find companies change their attitude. They don't do what they said they would. Where do we invest extra stuff? Because we need it. And more common one here is, why don't people actually try and reduce the energy consumption in data centers? Well, because I would have to change something, and change is a risk. Why change it? If we don't touch it, it doesn't go wrong.
No.
But isn't that about, you should be able to change things? Well, better not. How often do you do a DR test and fail over? Never. Why? Because it might not work. What's the point of having it? Things. So actually mature people deliberately do that because they want the confidence that it will work. So that sounds like common sense, doesn't it? Anybody ever written it down? But you try influencing something where actually everybody doesn't really know very much. So the easiest things don't upset things. So what is this about? So the first thing is the scope. We worked out, and I found when I came there, the first thing we had is what's our scope? And basically the scope, anything that's considered to be infrastructure or that has a data connection into it. Okay, that's how loose it is. If you want PCs, if you want phones, if you want industrial automation, if you want home users, doesn't really matter, anything, because the principles will be roughly the same. But it's anything above, or you could say below the application and the data layer. So it's not about, managing operating systems, but they will be on servers. It also does cover virtual systems where we have virtual equivalents of the same thing, just to make it a little easier, because a network now is composed of virtual elements as much as physical elements. So how do you manage it? Wouldn't it be nice to have a network diagram? Yeah, but now we need to network diagram the cloud. Yep, that's difficult. Well, what about the way you do it at the moment? Oh, we don't do that either. Well, good idea, because it's a control system. It helps understanding. It helps understand risks and things. So first thing is the scope. Second thing is change isn't about the technology side. That's only part of it. The technology is always going to change. But what about people who change? How do we get the skills and things? How do we prepare them? How do we communicate processes? How do we mature ourselves to actually get the benefits of all of this? What about when our suppliers change? What about when we get rid of companies? I've just got an inquiry, got a presentation to do on Friday with a big foreign company that's splitting the company into 3 separate parts. And they don't quite know which parts of the infrastructure supporting which. And one of the divisions has seen what was going on and took all the IT people into their group. And the other groups don't have any. There is no knowledge. So the centralized IT people that ran the whole worldwide infrastructure have all been taken off to run the one that was closest and knew what was going on. And the others have been told you can have money, but you have to employ contractors. So we were called by a contractor in Portugal, he's actually a Brit, saying, I need to document a worldwide infrastructure, and I have no staff and no teams, and all knowledge is in people's heads, and I'm not allowed to talk to them because they're busy working on their bit. Right. How did that happen? Well, it's because the business changed and IT has to react to it. And there was obviously external forces. What's the latest one? Is it AI? Is it this? Is it that? And everything. So you still have to react to regulations and other things that come in. So that's going to constantly change. Might be a war or two coming up. Yeah, there's a lot of bunkers being built in Northern Europe at the moment. And from a transparency of that, people still won't communicate with each other. They miscommunicate because they don't have common standards and things. And if you don't trust information, well, you'll just go and do a site survey, you'll run a workshop. But what about decision makers? Well, they have to make decisions on the basis of what they have. So the whole point about lifecycle management is think 20 years. If we're going to think 20 years, we might as well do it properly now, because it's not going to go away with one project or one person. It's a complete change in the way of working. This is a monster. It's the worst thing you could possibly do. We have to say the way we manage is bad. But actually, I've got a standard that says it's bad. Or, sorry, we've got improvement, or we've got a low score, and we can improve on it and other things. So So it's about changing things. But let's just say there's a will to do it, because a lot of the regulations are all saying the same thing from a cybersecurity perspective. You should understand what you've got and where it is and what it does as a starting point, and then you create your policies. What happens when you've got 20 different regulatory authorities all saying the same thing and you still don't have a list of things? And the answer is, eventually people will say we really should have one. But we're going to come in and we'll probably audit you and say you don't have one, that means you don't do all these things. So this is how things are structured. So we have a chair called Jerry Bowman, who's the chair, the figurehead, and the customer, which is how I know him so well, and has been for many years. And we have 5 different process areas. One looking at the business side, the life cycle planning, where we cover governance, security, procurement, rules, all sorts of other things. Because this is about maybe even changing the way you source expertise in your environment. And you have a better choice of being able to say what's best for the business. And then the others maybe follow that. My section, information management, was originally called documentation. And they said, the problem is documentation. I said, 1, is boring. 2, it's actually a bit more than documentation. Documentation, you think a document, but it's about how you manage and communicate things that are really complex and difficult. And then we have design, implementation, and operations. So they have their own process areas, and they may have different teams doing that. But the whole emphasis here is what you design and how you build it and then how you operate it. There's a big problem there. As we know, guys design it, somebody else builds it, and the operations often get thrown stuff. You have to go back and find out. Let's go and do an asset survey. Why? Well, because we've got thousands of project documents, but I'm not extracting all of that, and they all overlap each other. So a lot of this you'll find will be to get operations to be more mature and force and dictate how things are implemented and handed over to them. Well, that's novel, isn't it? We need more operations people. We need them to set some of the processes and the goals, so these guys know how to label something, rather than just say, I built it. Yeah, did you label it? Where's the QA function? That's what you would normally have, isn't it? How many people have a QA function for projects, where they go and see what was built and did they follow the procedures? Very few. So actually, it's fundamental that you must have controls in various forms. My bit is here. There's 2 of us that sort of run the committee. I chair it, so I'm the figurehead. I stand things. I'm a bit bolshy with people. And my vice chair, Gary, he works for the US military in Europe. And they are listening to all of this. And he is taking a lot of what we learn and taking it back and supporting his own organisation, because they really want to hear what good methods and techniques are there. Because like most large organisations, there's a lot of improvement that could be possible if people knew how to do it. And you have to explain it simply. From a practical perspective, this is one of the presentations we did on the webinars. Can you secure your infrastructure by design? No. Oh, because you can walk through a door that's left open. Doesn't matter how good a firewall you've got. If you let any contractor into your data center with a USB stick, everything else is compromised. Oh. If somebody nicks the removable disks out of your servers as a contractor, and you never check their credentials, what's the point? And that's happened to me on projects in various places where it has happened and we've been thrown off site while they do a formal investigation and things. Do I have to change my infrastructure to stay secure? Yes. But you can't. Your change may not be because of business needs or technical needs. It may actually be because of security needs. Get rid of that supplier. That was the one that came out a few years ago, wasn't it? With Chinese manufacturers. But what's going to happen next? And there may be these things where you have no choice, you have to do it. So the way to look at this is, really, this is the project activities where a lot of the activity happens. And the thing there is operations pushes back. And just like with ITIL, and you should really fill in a change form before you change things. That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be nice to log all the incidents and then try and work out if it's down to changes and people not following rules and things. So, you could almost say people are seeing that the operational side is important. Like the manufacturing division in a company, you've got to have the factory working. What underpins the processes and links between them all is the way you manage information. And normally it's fairly bad. Some organisations got it right, but it all depends. And with the governance, you can't just put governance on this side and that. You've got to start thinking about these guys are complaining about something. They need to tell the design teams they've got to change the way they do stuff, and that the things have to be easier. Because actually, these guys are not following the rules. So do change supplier. It's a bit difficult to change supplier. They're the only ones that know the site. Well, the end result is not good. You may have to go and change your favourite supplier because we need this. We need extra service. We need them to do this. So that's how it's done. Where do you start? Do you start at the top? Strategic? When would you deliver anything if you try and work out how everything works and everything like that? So the answer was no. You start at the bottom, do the one that nobody does. It's this, which is how I've ended up with the hot potato thing, is go and deliver something that doesn't exist yet. A way to manage information across processes, teams and life cycles for any size of organisation, small or large. Yeah,
So,
Dave?
would you say your knowledge and information management, which is totally used in a different way in the UK? So the information management per se,
Yeah,
and the knowledge, which you said,
yeah.
is
The thing there is to focus it. It's about infrastructure, the technology infrastructure. It's not necessarily about business information management. But you could say it's really focused on the IT systems and the infrastructure. There's a whole area about managing data,
So the
organisational
impact
data.
that you can realise a change with is best delivered through the information management. And that's where you get the best bang for your buck in your ability.
For most organisations, this is there's a problem area for them. So is this going to help them solve that problem area? And that's why it wasn't me that decided it. I didn't want to volunteer. But basically, the TIA got together with the committees and said, what would give the most value to people from a standards perspective? Because there's a lot of standards. So the first one we should do is how to document technical infrastructure and how to manage the information. And we go back to the basics, as you'll see. It's not difficult, not for me.
For infrastructure alone.
Infrastructure alone, yes. But it is a big area because it can cover everything. Wires, cables, power, equipment, PCs, but also the configurations of some of those to the extent it's configuration of the device. But it's not software management. So it's ambitious. But of course, there's a demand for it because everyone's got a problem. So this is the framework of standards. Basically, we have the 5 process areas that you see there, and the one highlighted in red is the one that I chair. On the left-hand side, we have different practice areas where we take something and then we define a standard for the information management of how you do security. Not just cyber security, but physical security and access control. It doesn't mean we're going to try and repeat every other security standard. We're just going to say, how does it fit from a life cycle perspective when you have 101 different security standards, but the same also with procurement. And there's some odd ones here. There's logistics, because what people don't realise is you can compromise everything by just leaving stuff lying around as you're building stuff and managing things and rolling out and doing major transitions. And so everybody said that needs to be an area in its own right. Procurement, obviously, is part of this, but also HR. How do we resource the people and the skills necessary? Because a lot of people go to third parties when really they should try and develop the skills in-house. But it seems to be the case that nobody wants to develop the skills in-house. Why? Because they won't be around for long. Well, try giving them a good pay and improve the morale and give them a pension, because they're not going to get one from anywhere else. So there's different areas. What you see in colour there is, that's the first one to be delivered, which we're looking to deliver the drafts before the end of this year. And it will include IT asset management as one of the various things you should probably do. Where would IT asset management fit into that? Where would it fit? Where would IT asset management fit into any of those process areas?
Information management.
Operations.
Design.
I'll show you what the results were, okay, because this is how we got ourselves organised as part of this. And then following that is then just going across the technology space, because this is really for a lot of technical people, but really the real power is making it simpler and easier rather than having 1,001 other types of standards you have to meet, depending on your industry and your location. So let's give you an idea of differences. So what would the difference be between how you do it now and how it could be done? So we'll have a simple example. I've got an empty equipment room. and we need to put a rack of equipment in there. Okay, so you put a rack and you put it there because it's easy and convenient. And what do you call it?
Rack one.
Rack one. You make up a naming convention because you need one, so everybody knows it. And then, of course, time goes by and we put in another rack. And what do you call that?
Rack two.
And then you put in another rack.
Rack three.
Okay, and then you put in another one. Okay, and you start realizing, hey, wait a minute, this isn't in any sequence. It's not very easy to understand. What we should have done is thought about this and planned the data center so that when we start laying it out, we have a plan and we build according to that, so we have consistency in labeling and everybody knows what to call something, even if they weren't on the original project. So you already know. So you pre-lay out things and then you just fill in the gaps. Doesn't that sound like common sense? And I can apply that convention worldwide. If I don't, then the next building that's done is somebody will call it Rack A. And somebody else will call it server rack. And somebody else will call it network rack and various other things. So you have a whole variation. So if an organization doesn't set this as a goal and a standard for designers to work to, and then people to build and label, it just makes it very difficult for operations when you're saying, can you go to the first rack in the room? Well, there's lots of racks. Do you mean rack one? Well, it's the one on the left. Well, that's not rack one. It's rack 5. Is it? It's funny that. In fact, the thing there is, did they even label them? Because often you won't even have labels on them. Maybe that's what you should do. Just guess and have a look. And that's what people do. They wander around data centers, highly secure data centers, with bunches of keys, looking in racks because nobody knows where things are. But often it's because the racks don't even have a number on them. That's standard. That's config management, isn't it? Just as well I'm around. I do a lot of data center stuff. So, but we may call it basic, but then if we start applying principles that we want you to do this, but think of it from an organizational perspective, maybe what we might do is we may make it a unique rack number. You can still call it rack 4, but we will call it RO4 and then prefix it with the floor and the equipment room type and then the building it's in. Because then you know what to call it from an administration perspective as opposed to just a local label that you wouldn't see. So now I can start to centrally manage things. I think you all know this, don't you? Isn't this what we do when we set up CMDBs and do asset management? The first thing is, can we have the same name for the building, the same name for the room, and then we can integrate data together. So just common sense, and you're experts. I shouldn't need to tell you this, but of course, we may put something on the end that also gives it a functional reference that's human readable. And this is now where we start getting into things about things will change, but the unique identifier won't change, but we'll have a label that indicates a function or a risk, just as we might indicate, some other things where we have a unique identifier for a server, but on the end of it, we may give a description. That's the backup DNS server. Ah, that's useful to know. Or I put that in my database as a function. Or I do a dependency in my CMDB with what it does, because that's better. Because it can have multiple dependencies then, rather than just one. So that sounds common sense, isn't it? So let's go a little bit further. When you start looking at the information sets that you have, as you go through a project and you have requirements, and then you go through design and build and operations, asset management is only one part of it. And when does that come in? Well, probably when you built it and operated it. It doesn't really affect any of the other things, because actually you don't even know exactly what's going to be built and which one and which serial number or anything like that. So actually some of these things will be more useful later on, but some of these things like physical layouts and policies and regulations, you can't put stuff in that building, you can't put stuff in that rack for various reasons and things. There's all sorts of things. There could be paper, there could be documents, could be all sorts. So this is the current state. There are thousands of these things, so many thousands, that if you just reduce them by half, that would save a lot of time and effort, wouldn't it? Save people doing them. But the issue here is to start getting away from being a project-orientated mentality. And why don't you actually deliver a lot of this stuff into what the operational people keep? A CMDB was the concept in it, or maybe multiple CMDBs, and workflow systems. So basically, don't have lots of separate artifacts, you'll never find them. So think common sense. So we looked and said, what type of different documentation is there for infrastructure? What are the forms that you see? And so it's not just data. We have policies, we have textual documents, we have rules and procedures, but we also have database documents, lists, not Excel, schematics, speciality of mine, and then also we have different consolidated systems. There's a whole load of acronyms. Anybody know what that one is? SIEM?
Some integration.
No, they will know it.
Logs.
Pardon? No,
Same.
Incident and event management.
you just in the wrong world, aren't you?
Security
It's
incident and event management.
Security, incident and event management. So when you set up a SOC rather than a NOC, you have a SIEM system where you often collate all the logs together so you can correlate and see things. Okay? Need some documentation because where are the logs coming from? We didn't know we had those servers, so there's no logs. AIM,
I've seen that personally.
an automated infrastructure management system. There's a whole load of acronyms. DSIM,
Data center.
I've seen that.
data center infrastructure management, a database that knows everything about your data center, but not the things outside it. ITAM, I think you know that one. BIM,
I know that one, building information management.
sure. Not building information modeling.
Or maybe you do, well, it's both,
Ah.
yes, modelling, that's true,
See?
actually.
We'll get onto the definition of change management next.
Office
But you can see there's a lot of stuff and it's all duplicated and repeated. The same device will appear in lots of different things. And then of course we've got all the other things where we have online portals, media, all sorts of other things, where the knowledge of the infrastructure is there and we have training courses on how to configure the service, how to label the cable, and all sorts of other things that all go alongside a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of stuff basically.
Surely if you're the manager for four,
Yeah.
you're never going to know all your own systems, let alone your people.
Exactly, it crosses lots of different teams and groups, and they need things particularly for their area, but there is often an overlap between them and others. So that's where we get into like the service management area, where service management is for all user services, but not necessarily all the infrastructure is yours, or all the applications are yours. But you still need a central point to be able to coordinate and understand the user's perspectives and to get some service reporting to allow you to understand where there are issues. And maybe you might also have change management, problem management, many of the other older style little processes. But basically, you rely on information. How many CMDBs are there? I deal with a lot of service management systems and they all go CMDB. You started with asset management, but don't do it anymore. We put it in a different system that's better suited for it. Service desk, we do trouble taking it. It's easier to type it in text or just have a generic problems with a PC. Well, what PC? Too much difficult. We can never get a list of PCs. So, and when you get to infrastructure, there is a complexity. So, what we've done, and I've got this spreadsheet, if anyone wants to hang around and look, is we sat down in a committee over probably a few months. And we've got consultants, we've got people who run universities and police forces and medics and all sorts of things. We've got consultants who build huge big campuses, various other things, all part of our committee. We've about 40 of you, I think, that have been coming in and out of this. And what you realise is they don't know each other's worlds. They don't know each other's terms. So with information management, I was sort of tasked, let's get some common jargon, a glossary, a lexicon. And that's one of the first steps you have. But what we did is we just said, let's categorize a few groups. And I've only shown two here. Some configuration management, just as rough groupings, and some asset management of lots of different things. And then a lot of them going, I didn't know that's what you did. I didn't know we have a list of equipment and warranties. Is that held by asset management teams or is that held by someone else? No. And then what we did is we mapped against the process areas and where do they think there's the most impact of not having that? Where do there would be a high impact on them? They really want to use it. So map, so where is it most useful to? And where there's a little star, who should really own it? And everybody disagreed with each other because they didn't even understand the terms. They'd never seen that before. When we get into the other areas, and this spreadsheet goes down a few hundred, and we have all the technical design, and we have all the security, and we have the procurement, and all the other things. And you then start realizing, everybody's going, this isn't easy. It says no. But it does start when you start realizing there's a lot of duplications. And what we did behind this, we did formats. There's typically a list, would be in a database, or would be in a diagram. Then people start saying, wait a minute, there's a whole load of lists that will say the same thing. Yeah, that's why you might buy a consolidated system and then put a lot of this asset management stuff in there. Approved equipment, a list of buildings and locations. Shouldn't that be the same list that the design teams use when they're naming things? They never look at the asset management list. We make up our own names for the buildings. Yeah.
Should there be a copy of this in every incident responders toolkit and crash box?
Basically, yeah, we were just identifying off the tops of our heads, but we have gone a bit further. This is just one of our internal case studies where we've used case studies to realise how do people know about things, and then how can they contribute, and then what stories have you got? And the stories run for a long time and things. But this is just a very small list. A list of all the equipment, the inventory. What do you mean by inventory? Is that active equipment, or is that anything like UPSs and patch panels and other things? Well, that's not an asset. Well, it's needed for the infrastructure.
It's a cool bit of kit we paid money for.
Did you buy it?
And some areas, you see that I put configuration management. Configuration management really has a high dependency on anything to do with naming, labelling, particularly that goes across standards, but doesn't mean they should own everything. Maybe implementation should own how things are labelled, so people actually label them according to that. They're the owners of it. They have to meet the operations needs, they have to do others, but they own and make sure that that process works. But configuration management is involved in that, but a label is not the same as an identifier.
Have you shown any insurance people this?
No, but let's just say there's a lot of people that would be quite interested, because it's a very easy way to see the maturity of an organisation, not just from an operational perspective, but also from projects. So let's move on.
You also have like the accounts department on there as well, because they.
Oh yeah, the procurement, yeah, RACI matrix, and then saying, can you identify all the projects and the costs and where they are now? Why? Because we have an evergreening or life cycle replacement policy. Anything over 4 years on this project, we have the money to take it all out again. Where is it? Oh, we don't know. We only have serial numbers, and we don't know what the equipment's called.
So you can regrade every 4 years and plan for
That's becoming normal now for life cycle replacement, because you can't just keep saying, let's wait to the next version of Windows and wipe out all the desktops and all the applications. We have to keep changing. So one of my big companies, big credit card company in the States, they typically replace 400 servers every 3 months worldwide. And they have a list of all the servers, and they just say those ones are 7 or 8 years old, get rid of them. Why? Although they work, get rid of them. Why? Because we have the problem with operating systems, you have the problems with security and patching and all sorts. So everything old is going to get replaced within a certain period, and we have a list of them. And they're mature, and that's a project activity which is dictated by the operational needs. But that came through from governance and cybersecurity saying is, you must do this, and it was saying it's a bit inconvenient, we've got other things to do. Said, no, put this on the list. This is actually a priority. This is a security priority. So it's different. It's different. You need money to do this. You need authority. What we then did, because we're clever, I'm a Visio expert, I then mapped all those information sets to a typical project process. So we ran a case study on how do you install servers into a rack. You have a request to do it. You have an assessment to say, we've got any racks with space. What do you need? Can we put it in there? What are the options? We need to do a costing. You'll push it back. And as soon as it's approved, you'll then go and do a design phase. You actually do a detailed design and allocate capacity and other things. And then you'll give the instructions. Once you've ordered all the kit, to somebody to go and implement it, build it. And then you'll have some post-tasks to update your asset management and a few other things. That may be part of this or that. A bit loose. But what information sets do you typically need or use as you do this? And when we did this and people realised, there's lots of Word documents, there's lots of Excel, there's a load of diagrams, and there's probably some workflow system, service management. When do you fill in a change management request in a service management in this project?
it's continuous, isn't it?
Yeah, but when do you fill it in?
Before we.
That fox over there with the really funny right.
Well, afterwards.
It's the one in the post-implementation task.
Post-implementation.
So what you should have done
last
week that
You should have done, yeah.
installed,
Build it first, then fill in the change form and say it was successful once we got it working. So, in theory, depending on your project processes, you may do some form of prior notice to say there's a project going on. But until you've got the detailed design and implementation plan, there's no point wasting everybody's time. Submit it when you've now got the ability to schedule things, and then tell everybody this is when we want to do it, and can we schedule it for this time? I can give you prior warning, but if I'm rolling out the same thing across 200 sites, that may be a big notification, but actually the detail for every single site would probably submit individually because each site's going to be independent.
But
So-
would you do them in hypervigilant mode for the first couple, so you're keeping an eye on them?
But basically, this comes down to how the project works. And things.
They're cool.
So you still have to then say how you implement and do things and control things. When do you do QA? Do you do it afterwards, or do you do it as part of implementation? And there's a whole range of issues. The key thing there is you start to understand the complexity, and also if you don't have any of these information sets, or you can't find them or they're not shared, you create them yourself. So one of these, I think it's that one there, with lots of lines going to it, is rack layouts. So to allocate where things go, you need rack layouts at an assessment stage, but you need, particularly at design stage, to put things in the rack. And then you have to give the rack diagrams to the guys who build it to know where to put it. And then the operations teams should know where it is, and they'll just feed off it later on and things. So if you don't have rack diagrams, you'll do a site survey and create your own diagrams of what's there. The project teams will create their rack diagrams and do this. And then you'll have yet another set of rack diagrams. Probably the same rack could be documented 15, 20 times in the space of 2 or 3 years. Okay, that's the waste that there is. How do you solve this? Let's have ownership of that space, of that documentation, and they have to respond quickly enough to support these needs. Or you put it into a consolidated system that actually has that. But as well as rack diagrams, we also have patching lists, we have equipment inventories, we have power capacity. It's not easy. That's why it takes ages. 9 months to get a server installed. I had one server that took 14 months to get a server installed into a rack because everybody had sign-offs and were too busy doing other things. So, common problems, everybody uses different names, so that doesn't help. So you can't consolidate all these different sets of spreadsheets and the things, as we all know. And we have different names for the buildings, never mind everything else. We capture the same things multiple times. We reproduce the same thing again and again because they've given me the PDF version of the old floor plan. It's a good start, but I have to do a new version. I've got to start from the beginning and redraw the whole thing. That's quite normal. Where do you find the latest version? How do you know what the latest version of something is? It's got a bigger number on the end or date. If you don't find that thing, you don't know it's the latest one. So, concept of lifecycle management, there's a lot of documentation where it's exactly the same name, no matter what changes have happened to it. So when somebody does open recent on an Excel spreadsheet, it brings up the same one, even if it's changed. So actually, that's practical and useful for people. They don't have to go hunting around. It also means you can web publish a lot of this documentation to the same website, which you can't do if you keep version controlling it and all the web addresses change. Because that's what people will do. So make it simple and easy for people. There's lots of inconsistency in all sorts. It's not just data, it's also symbols and things, how you label stuff. So there's a lot of issues. So what we're doing as part of this standard is recommending good ways to do things. So a few little tests for you. How do you name a server?
Gandalf.
Okay. All these different themed ones that you see at the top, if you can read it, are all from ones that I have come across personally. Okay, name it after different types of weather. Okay, there's a UK bank that does that. Okay, but they also do other things. Is it whiskies? Is it planets? So what type of naming convention? Do you want dashes, dots? Do you want various other things? Do you want to build the name out of the location? We should have location code, shouldn't we? Outsourcers do that when they're managing large infrastructures. Internal, we can't call the building the same name, never mind everything else. So a lot of this is all about simplification, keeping it and making it easy. Who specialises in doing things like that crosses multiple technologies? Asset management does, doesn't it? Does anybody listen to them? Nope, they have to go and work out afterwards. But basically, project teams should follow what operation information finds best. Use the same names for everything. And this is just active equipment names. What about the passive stuff? What do you call a patch panel? What do you call a blanking plate and other things? And choose, and I expect you've seen all of those. Yeah, asset numbers, that was an interesting one. We label all our servers with just the asset number and no other names because it makes it secure. You have no idea what it does. That's brilliant. And so the asset number stays with the machine, yeah? What happens when you upgrade that machine with a new platform? Well, it's a different asset. So what are you going to do to all your software then?
Possibly.
Oh, that doesn't work, does it? If we've actually hard-coded into software to go to that, and it doesn't work with our DNS, and it's not a very good name, is it? No.
It's secure. You cannot install it. You
Yeah.
cannot use it.
It's secure, but no one knows what it does.
It's
So-
secure against yourself.
It is. So sometimes you may have what it does. So there's a lot of different approaches. So,
Just before you move on, we have a question that's come in on the meeting chat.
yep,
Should data center labeling use the tile grid reference? So like A1 in a corner, that kind of thing. So many I know number the first row of cabinets from left to right, then row
Yeah.
1, row 2, row 3.
this is actually part of the PIA 942 standard, which says you should use tile referencing as a way to identify the location of things in the data center
Uh-huh.
as an option, because what if you've got things that are underneath the floor, like humidity sensors and leaks? What if you've got things in the ceiling and you've got a Wi-Fi access point? It's not in a rack. So how do you reference where something is? And so they recommend you use an XY coordinate with 2 alphas and 2 numbers. Okay, some people use that for racks, but a lot of people also use a much more simpler way of saying we have row A, rack 1, 2, 3, 4. The difficulty with the row A, rack 1, 2, 3, 4, racks come in different widths. So one rack might have 20 racks, or one row might have 20 racks, another might have 10. And some of the big storage systems. So the TIA convention is if you do use tile referencing for a rack, use the front right-hand corner. And then you know what the front of the rack is, and everybody can say, as long as that. But you do have to produce a floor plan and make it easily available so that people know where to look. And you have to give it to them as project teams because there's no numbers on the floors. It's just a schematic, but you can use that for many things, tile referencing. So yes, so it can be used and can be used with rows, but it's really there to identify any area of a data center. Where is my fire extinguisher in the room? Fire extinguisher bottle. Well, it's on this tile reference. Good, I know exactly where it is then.
Well, we've got a thank you from Greg as well to the comment, number/letter at the ceiling height works.
Yeah, I went to one place where they have racks, so there's rack A1, 2, 3, 4, and then you put racks in the cable trays above because there wasn't enough space for the patch panels. So now what do we do when you have 2 racks in the same place? One on top of each other. And that rack, the one above, serves 2 racks underneath. So which one does it take? Does it take both of them? So we just put /OH on the top. So there's the rack name with OH, makes it unique, and it tells you it's an overhead rack and things. How do you put it on the floor plan? You have to have a layer for ones on the floor and a layer for ones in the ceiling. Things. Anybody heard of snake case? Yeah? What would you recommend? So if you're going to name something, would you recommend kebab? Or would you recommend snake case? Or would you not have any form of intermediate blanks? Would you actually use a Pascal case where you use uppercase to denote a separation of different things like buildings?
Most of the time I actually use snake case, mainly
Snake case?
because it gives me the opportunity, it's all capital letters, therefore it's a lot more easier to
So
distinguish.
that's screaming snake case.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, so you make everything capitals because then, yeah. Let's get back to basics. Let's get everybody doing it the same way, not dashes, dots, underscores, and other things. Life could be simpler if we made it simple. So who's going to dictate this to the design teams of servers and networks where they're quite protective about how they do things? And the answer is you need somebody who's got slightly more power than them. You need an information management manager. Particularly a grumpy one. Yeah.
Size of the alphabet, would you limit it to just 32 characters?
Yeah, and think about foreign language and various other things, and the same with numbers and that. But basically, the shorter the name, the easier it is for everybody. So don't use Welsh town names. Okay. Some people do that. And guess where they're located? Because no one else can. And then they talk to each other, and nobody knows. It's like, where's the server? What's it called? blow that. Oh, could you write it down, please? Right. So let's get these sorted out. Okay. People have developed standards. They just need to be told what common sense is. And I'm just getting close to time, but I'm just finishing. So what should your goals be? What should anybody's goals be? It's just basic common sense. Standardize your naming, consolidate multiple data sets where it makes sense, particularly if there's workflow and things with them, provide multiple viewpoints to stop people creating the same thing 20 times by actually doing reporting. It could be visual reporting, it could be reporting out of a CMDB or whatever like that, but tailor the outputs to people to do things. And here's just some examples. What do you call a port if it's card 2 on a switch? Do you do it like that, like that, like that, like that, like that, like that? And the answer is, write it down. And then say, that's what we're going to put into our information sets. No matter what the manufacturer says, because the manufacturer says net 0123, the information server. If you run Linux on it, it's actually, well, no, net 123 is if it's Linux, it's 1234 if it's Windows. So the same port will have different names depending on the operating system. And then the other thing is, just think, don't make it too complex. You can put lots of things in there, but what if the building names are long and things? Use a code in some cases, it can be simpler, but simplification. So, root causes, why do we need a new standard when there's plenty of them? Because we still don't seem to be solving these problems of direction and policies and enforcement, and people still do their own things. If you lose control, it costs a lot of money to baseline things and get it back. I trace cables for a living as part of my work. Now, you may call that tedious and awkward, and it is, but I don't do it. I get my people to do it. So it's tedious for them, but we get paid a lot of money because there is no choice if you don't trust anything and nothing is labeled. Do it once, label it, and document it, and then no one else has to ever trace a cable. Many people wiggle the most important cables simply because they have no choice. They put labels on them that says it goes from server A to switch 5. And they never change the label, and there is no server A anymore. And there's a switch on the end, but it's not switch 5. So what do I do? So if you change the names of devices in your infrastructure, which people will do remotely, be prepared to change all the labels of the things that are still working, ripping them off and putting new ones on, because it doesn't make sense from a life cycle perspective, does it? Why not put just a number on the cable with no reference to any name of any device, and you never need to change a label? But some people persist on spending weeks with labeling machines and cassettes. I put in 10 cables and it took me 5 minutes. I labeled 10 cables and it took me 2 hours.
But the cables are relevant if you're looking at what's on either end. So
Yeah, if you're troubleshooting, but if you're giving instructions to somebody, tell them to take this out, give them something that's got a reference on there, you know you've got the right cable. Why? Because the ports aren't named on that device because they're obscured, or there are no ports, they're just a card cage, and there's a whole lot of ports. Which is port number 1? Is it the one at the bottom or the one at the top? The one you want is the one that's got a cable called this. That's the important one. So unless you have a standard, there's not going to be much change. And you need to get somebody to basically communicate beyond their team. And so that's why this will create new roles. And so my buddy Gary, the guy we talked about, he is now the lifecycle manager for Europe.
So going back to your two
The bosses liked the idea and they gave him the job, and he went, oh, thanks.
Going back to your 2-wire Ethernet, are you saying you can actually get 4 pairs down a normal Ethernet?
No, you only have 2 wires. They're thicker than normal.
Right.
And they're designed to cope with lots of power, and it's bidirectional. So you just have
Power and data.
power and data, yeah.
Okay.
It's called single pair Ethernet, and it's designed for anywhere where you need long distance and you need a reasonable data rate, and the data rate will go lower, maybe down to 10 meg or 100 meg for very long distances, but it's adequate for most IT needs, and particularly industrial sensors and systems. Think of doing a car park, putting sensors in it. Think of doing anything where you have sensors and IoT type stuff. But this has been going on for years now. It's just starting to come through. Could be more documentation, basically.
Nice.
And they probably, of course, won't be in a CMDB because it's low-level infrastructure. So we don't do that. Anyway, just so you're aware, I've come to the end. What are the objectives of my team? Basically, the whole aim is to reduce the amount of work done managing infrastructure by actually removing the amount of information that they have to manage, by simplifying it, by stopping them recreating stuff, by simple things, standardizing, putting in QA verification so you don't get things built badly. If there's a decommission that needs to be done, that's actually done as part of the project, as part of this as well. And then assume everybody's going to change, so you can't rely on local knowledge. You have to have things written down and then make them visible to people. Go back to where we started. Do you think this will probably raise the awareness of your skills and your knowledge? Because who else knows about doing things like this, where you have to actually organise an organisation and all the various teams in order to be able to do a task that crosses them all? And who creates naming conventions for buildings and various other things? Is that part of a CMDB? Well, if you want to know where something is, you're going to have one consolidated set of information. So look out for this as it comes along. You can use some of this in daily life, because just use the term. Don't use asset management, use lifecycle management, right? You need asset management to do it, but there's other things as well. Like, how do you identify the risks of changing all these things that need to be replaced? To get more information, you can go online. We have a lot of webinars. You just search, go into Bright Talk, if you're familiar with Bright Talk, search for TIATR 60, and you'll come across a lot of stuff. There's 30 standards to be written. We are looking for more people to come on and widen the gene pool, because the thing we've actually found is we have enough problems understanding each other's experiences to be able to contribute to this. We just need more. So I hope that's been useful for yourselves, and you understand that the world is changing out there, and this is an area that's probably come in. I'm not sure if there's any more questions that have come in, are there?
There was one question that's come in, although I've managed to press something so it's no longer on the screen, which is single pair Ethernet using Belkin adapters that carry data in the electric rings in your house, so power Ethernet?
No.
Yes.
No.
Nice.
This is the sort of thing where you'll get switches with single power Ethernet connectors on them for industrial switches and systems and things.
Modern version of 10 base 2 then.
Sort of in a way, but the implications of this, one is it's ruggedized, and two, it's small, so that actually you can get a lot of stuff. You can have a little industrial controller. And you've got to bear in mind, how do people control all the robots in car factories and various other things? There's a lot of old technology and wires and power and everything all in these little control boxes, and this is what this is all designed to help with, as well as obviously building systems. Temperature sensors, lighting sensors, everything.
24-volt systems then, that'd be a key sort of replacement.
Yeah, anything where you have some form of distance, but you also want to supply the power, because you don't want to have to apply it. There's enough there to power a lot of monitors. So you put digital signage around places.
You'll still have the sort of differences between the long runs, which would be solid, and patching, which would be multi-core.
Typically, yes. So what you have is you have distance limitations and numbers of connections, but there's a couple of different variations of single pair Ethernet coming through. And we'll see it in data centers. Why? Because it's great for doing those things. But where do all the cables go? Well, they all go back to central cabinets. Wait a minute, what do we call that rack in that telecoms room again?
Yeah.
So while there's a lot of wireless stuff coming out, which is all really useful and convenient for people, in reality, for a lot of things that really have to work, you really want not just the data, you also want to supply the power to it as well. And the power, of course, could be UPS, so fire alarm systems and other things. All sorts of stuff, anywhere where there's a wire attached, clocks on walls, things like that, power them, so you have to put batteries in and things. Buzzers, little buzzers are all going to probably come with it as well, because it just makes it easy, and then you can control in software what happens when you make a circuit or not. But you get a lot of data. Has that been useful for people?
I guess it's secure.
Okay.
One question now.
This is the first knowledge in the UK of what is happening here,
Yeah.
and it's getting close to developing and coming up. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
So we see more frequently that we have concepts like Internet as a Service. We have many companies rely on AWS.
Yes.
So if your company rely on AWS or is want to check infrastructure as a service from several providers,
Yeah.
you may want to have your auditors auditing that companies to see how far are they going with all this.
But for the big hyperscalers, traditionally, they have taken an approach to infrastructure that because it lasts so little in terms of performance, only like 2 or 3 years for all the servers and things. And what they often do is they have the expression, they just wipe the white space. So you have a data center, and all you do is you just take everything out, throw it in a bin literally, and then create new ones. Why? Because the new ones go faster, but they're less power, they have different communications and fiber. Don't try and manage that. But for most enterprises, you don't have that type of capability, but hyperscalers are having to change. The issue with hyperscalers is AI, where before you would have lots of servers connecting to a switch and that would do the communications for you. With AI, you don't want the delay of having a switch there, so you connect all the servers to each other. And you go, wait a minute, we're just sort of putting 10 to 20 to 50 times more cables in a smaller space. Can we not have special connectors that are smaller than the ones you currently have, than RJ45s and fiber? So in the TIA, the committee called TIA42, that's developing cabling standards and connector standards and things, they are under pressure for even higher density cables, where you can't put any labels on them. You can't read anything. So you do have to take a different approach when you get into that sort of environment, where in theory, you don't worry about hardware failure, you handle it in software. So actually you assume, and that's why AWS and most large organizations, they assume hardware will always fail, so buy cheap stuff, because software will then go around it, and that's why you have unreliability of service on a lot of cloud services. Quite normal.
So to stop history repeating itself, and knowing that, I won't name the company, you've earned a good living out of when you go BCSI to, what are you going to do different this time?
What am I doing different?
Yeah.
The first thing is, from my perspective, everybody out there has the same starting point, which is they don't know what they've got. They've got lots of information in lots of places, but none of it's joined up.
And do you feel a role for this committee? This group?
One of the, I'll call it a frustration, it's not a go at anybody yet. One of the frustrations is that as a committee with both the config management and service management, we never actually developed our own standards or our own methods and promoted them. We just talked about industry things and others, rather than as a group saying, this is the way we think should be done. Let's give a little pasty or some documentation and theories to educate everybody. And then also it will help us understand things well, because we'll have something to discuss, as opposed to this new version of ITIL. Yeah, but what does it mean to us? And we're practitioners, everybody's practitioners here. There's lots of bits that don't work or we don't understand.
But where I'm coming from is, rather than letting, I won't name the company, sell, rebrand, and then everyone had to certify in ITIL. And it was embarrassing that the BCS after you gave it to them. So where I'm coming from is, if it was an OWASP type thing, you'd have an open charter for it to prevent that happening again. Certify.
The plan within the TIA is that the standards will be auditable. So in order to audit them, you need auditors. So it helps if they've got some subject matter knowledge themselves anyway, but also they want to control how auditors get their credentials. So that hasn't been decided yet, but the whole intention is what we're providing is a mixture of a prescriptive standard, things you can be measured against, but it's also a bit of a hybrid standard as well, where there's aspirations to do things. So we can't tell people how to manage things. We can then say you should at least do a bare minimum. Write a document to say that you have a labelling convention, which is distributed and educated to people. You can be measured against that. What's actually in that document is subject to local conditions and the type of industry. So there are certain things you should have, various things, you should have processes, you should have owners. So there's nothing difficult about that. But of course, you do need practitioners who understand an industry to make it well. Just the same with ITIL and things. Customer can't do it by himself. There's too much to learn. You bring in an expert to guide you as part of this. And this is the aim behind this, that there will be a need for experienced people to help with developing the processes and the education and taking people through a journey.
It's self-sustainable, which is the new bit. I love that. Congratulations, David. Don't know how the rest of us feel, but I am inspired.
Oh, thank you, that's nice. Why am I doing it with the TIA and am I not doing it with the BCS? Because there's no interest.
So bad.
There's no interest though.
Before we get too much to BCS thing, you know, we do have to get between here and the outside door on the way out.
Yes.
And we may have had a couple of drinks before we do that. And I don't want to keep people away from that too much. So
Yeah.
what I'll say is, if we've got one more question, because we don't have anything else from the meeting chat, except quite a few thank yous, very interesting, very personal style, etc.
Good.
So thank you very much for that.
Nice.
So just send her an email, say I'll sign up, sorry.
I was just going to say clarification on, say, like those cases and things like that.
Yeah.
Of the naming conventions.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that there's different ones. It's you just have to choose one and be consistent.
You have to choose one and make a deliberate choice so that people know what to do.
It's consistency
Yeah.
and sticking to what
In
you say you're going
practice,
to do.
Server teams will name things often around function of the service, and it won't be dependent on location, because servers will be moved around and they're virtual things. Network devices are often locally named, so you know that's the switch on the 6th floor, or that's the core switch for this building and things. So what you'll actually get is different technology teams will have their own naming conventions for good reasons, but you should write it down and then communicate it.
What you're saying is you can have a bigger thing that accommodates that,
Yes.
but you superimpose.
You could have public
Consistent.
registers so that people can get it.
There's a lot, obviously, education here of what is a good naming convention. And for those that know me from the past, I can bore you to death if you want, but basically, in hindsight, you're going, why don't people do it like that then? Says, well, because they don't know. The first thing is people don't know what standards are already there. So the aim of TR60 is not to recreate existing standards. In many cases, to highlight and say, this is in a reference, go and look at this, use it. This is why. Because it helps towards the bigger picture of managing over the long term.
Because sometimes they are options which change within the
Yeah.
environment. What's better in one environment
That's right.
might be the best.
But make a deliberate choice as to what option you choose and communicate it.
Guys,
Cool.
with
Yep.
that, what I'm going to do is I'm
Yep.
going to draw it to a closure so we've got the online people, and then we can take the conversation out. So we can have some food,
Good.
some wine. So yeah, and good to see the healthy debate going on.
Thanks very much.